And certainly mainstream media in the 90s did nothing other than try and knock people down. And God forbid you should be young and successful.
The first failure is to do with your failure as you see it to stand up to media scrutiny, particularly when you were a younger actor and people were very unkind about your body. Tell us about this.
Well, I look back on it now and I just think, my God, first of all, how were the people around me letting that happen? And of course, it's different now. There are social media platforms like X and, of course, Instagram and things, none of which I have. But you often will hear that someone has defended somebody else publicly on social media. Um, and that didn't exist, of course, back in the day. But I just don't. It's just this very strange thing that used to happen to young actors and actresses. There was almost this assumption that you were fair game, that your privacy was automatically not something you should expect to have anymore, and that you were almost asking for it, certainly from the British press. And I was always a very normal shape. I'd never had any issues with my own physical self. I wasn't worried about my physicality. I felt well. I felt strong. I felt clear-headed about my physicality. And it was only when suddenly the media decided that I was overweight, when I was a size, oh my God, I don't know, 10, 12, 14, 12 again, 14 again, 10 again, 12 again, whatever. I was a young person living life and just being normal. Now it is a movement. It's a movement that I feel part of, thank God. But it's a movement that I feel proud to sit back and kind of go, okay, well, I know that I was at the very beginning of all of this a very, very long time ago, but maybe I could have accelerated the beginning of that movement had I really stood up for myself more. And had I stood up for myself more and been clear and called people out for abusive language, actually, it may have in turn given other actresses the inspiration to do the same. And that would have advanced that movement, I feel, just a bit more. And anything where women stand together and are using their voices en masse is only ever a great thing. And I just wish it had come sooner.
I think you're being incredibly hard on yourself, and I appreciate it. But from a personal perspective, I think you have done an enormous amount to normalize not even body positivity, but kind of body neutrality. That sense that my body's great, it's strong, it can do stuff. Now let's leave it aside and concentrate on more important things. And I think we also underestimate at our peril how difficult the 90s were. I mean, they were a sort of they were the
Yeah.
badlands of people having constant opinions and those being splashed across the front pages of our tabloids for women who were constantly confused by the messaging of whether to be ladettes or sylphs. And in the midst of that, you're still a teenager. So your first role is a major role is 17 in Heavenly Creatures. Sense and Sensibility,
I was
you were
19.
19.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So
Yeah.
obviously there's going to be fluctuation and hormones during that time.
But the point is, I was actually little anyway.
Yes.
I mean, I remember having my measurements taken for Sense and Sensibility, and I remember the costume designer saying to me, "Cool, 26.5-inch waist. I don't think I've been that since I was your age." And I remember thinking, "Oh, is that even a?" I wasn't even aware of like what was a small measurement or a big measurement. I didn't have a clue. But I do remember I was actually quite I was fairly petite.
Yes.
Um and it's just, yeah, you're right. The 90s, that strange, strange time where it was thought that women were all meant to be a certain size. And how on earth the media could have been so negative, and not just about how people looked and how women looked, but in general, and it's one thing about this country that I do wish would change, and perhaps it is a little bit. But in America, whatever people may or may not think of America, and it certainly depends on where you're from, but Americans on the whole are really great at celebrating each other's achievements, saying, "Good for you! You did such a great job. I hope you're proud of yourself." They'll say lovely things like that, whereas here it's like, "Well done, well done." And it's just say it quickly and walk away. It was almost as though they would come at it with this attitude of, ah, okay, so you think you're clever, do you? I've never thought I was clever at all.
Mm.
I've always thought I was lucky and had to keep working hard to stay in the game. Um, and so it was a really rough introduction to what it was like to be famous, and it put the fear of God in me. I remember thinking, I do not want to be famous. This is terrible. This is absolutely awful. Stop it now. I really remember feeling that. And after Titanic, actively making choices to do the smallest possible things I could find, whilst I was still learning who I was, learning how to act. You don't walk into this business and know how to do it all. You learn on the job. And I hadn't also been to drama school like RADA, or I hadn't been to any of those places. There never would have been the funds for something like that, or for me to even fantasize about something like that. And so I really did learn on the job and still do. Um, and I just know that after Titanic, I really just needed the space to just figure out who I was as a performer. Um, and not to feel pressured into saying yes to things just because there might have been a large salary attached to it. Fortunately for me, I've never been motivated by finances somehow.
I hope you enjoyed that video. Be sure to check out the full episode of How to Fail wherever you get your podcasts. And also make sure you're following us on social media for all the latest updates.